This is a reading of my commentary on the fifth applied precept. Traditionally, it's the one about refraining from using intoxicants that cloud the mind. But in the ordinary mind phrasing of the precept, it's I bear witness to the reality of delusion and the desire to evade the painful truths of life in myself and in the world, and aspire to experience reality directly with clarity and kindness to self and others. We turn away from our life and we turn towards it. If shame and shaming are our turning away from experiencing this moment and from life as it is, and our desire is turning towards experiencing both our reality and our fantasy, where does this leave delusion? Delusion suggests that what I appear to see, what I think I see, isn't really that way, and hence that I misunderstand, misrecognize and misidentify my reality. We've explored over previous precepts the central illusion by which we all live, that we experience the things of the world, that's me, you, sentient beings, doors, happiness, time and space, as being fully separate from and independent of each other, and so as they're being other than relational. We've explored too the mirror image of this delusion, the idea that because things, like any such separate essence, therefore nothing really exists, and hence all being is only delusion. But to see truly, or as truly as we can, is to see things as both real and empty, and so finally as not separate, and that this is simply what existence is. Hence, delusion too is real. We really see this way, and seeing this way has very real effects in the world. In Buddhism, the cure for our delusion is often talked about in terms of the purification of our mind and perceptions, and in Zen we often speak of seeing things as they really are. Such ideas can be dangerously dualistic though, and we may imagine this as some lifting of the veil to reveal a really real world behind appearances, or get hung up on ideas of inner calm or some mental state of unruffled equanimity. This precept originally referred to the heedlessness brought on by drinking alcohol, and if I do get drunk, my mind definitely does get clouded. I can't even begin to think rationally. So we contrast this with our normal or ideal mental state of calm or mindfulness and think that that's the point of this precept. Of course, in reality, our consciousness is changing rapidly all the time as we respond to our environment. Hormones instantly change, our whole body's working as our heart rate and breathing shift, and so oxygen levels rise and fall. Our focus and awareness changes in both object and in breadth. Our passing emotions are our engagement with the world, and neither the way we perceive or understand the world is it ever possible to be free of delusion. Yet, we are not defiled by the contents of our thought, to quote Barry Magid, sort of quoting Dogen. So rather, the purification of our mind in search of inner peace or perfect mindful awareness, this precept actually asks us a rather different set of questions. To turn once again to Diane Rossetto. Our approach to this precept is not to determine how or to what extent a substance or an activity may cloud or alter our experience, but rather to point to how we may use and abuse them by obscuring the wisdom and intelligence present in life as it is in any moment, any event, and in any place. This precept is about the ways we use whatever substance to alter or escape our experience. So life as it is offers us wisdom and intelligence, offers this as our experiencing, and in trying to change, evade or escape this experience, we actually turn away from life itself, which is my life, of course. Why would we do this? Why don't we want to be present for our own lives, well, we turn away from dukkha, from suffering. That is both our suffering and the suffering we share with all beings. The suffering we experience as pain, fear, shame, and all the rest. The routes we choose are many and various, but they're never ours alone. For the most part, are only too familiar to us all. The experience of one of Diane's students can take us to the heart of this. She or he's not an addict or an alcoholic, just a regular guy or gal coming home from work to their family. Student. As I work with this precept, I realise that I have expectations, that I should experience certain feelings around certain situations. For example, I should feel happy when I get home from work at night and I see my partner and kids. When I don't, I often reach for a beer or a glass of wine so that I can relax and loosen up in order to enjoy them more. I know my intention is to relax, but would that be such a bad thing if it allows me to be there and enjoy my family more? Would you call this addiction? Diane. But are you really there? Would there be another way to be there and honour this tenseness rather than ignoring it? This is what your practice can offer you. There's a way of talking about addiction much like what you might be describing here. A requirement that causes us to act in body, speech and mind in a certain way in order to alter our experience. What's your requirement here, student? That I will always be relaxed and enjoy coming home and being with my family. Diane. Where is it written that you must always be relaxed and enjoy your family? This question is your point of entry. Grab this question with your life before you reach for the bottle of beer. You'll learn something. I don't know what that will be. That's your discovery. Own it. Your addiction is your requirement, not the beer or the wine. So, recognising our requirement is a vital step. We talk too of recognising our resistance to our life as it is, and our requirements are one major aspect of this resistance. But maybe calling it a requirement makes it sound just too voluntary, too intentional on my part, like I just decided to feel this way. That's absolutely not how our requirements feel. My experience is of dukkha, this physical, bodily experience of emotional pain that shows up as the nervous tension or jumpy insecurity that makes me reach for a beer or pour the wine. This is a nagging need, an intimate and personal distress, even if often so subtle it hovers on the edge of consciousness. One that also brings me into self-consciousness rather than awareness. Self-consciousness as lacking, inadequate, back to all our usual stuff. That's where I enter the round of identification and shaming, as I identify myself as the inadequate partner or parent who can't really cope. Calling this my requirement invites me to stay at this judgmental, moralising level of the individualised self. It's all about me and my foolish, wrong-headed requirement. Why don't I just drop it and act like a grown-up? Maybe. It's not about me. I think instead it's more interesting to ask, where did this requirement come from? Not in the sense of trying always to chase back to my personal trauma or core beliefs, but instead letting the circle move gently outwards from myself in isolation to ever broader circles of relationship. I'm not looking to pin blame or find the answer, but instead just map the territory by becoming aware of our dukkha, our dis-ease, and simply allowing ourselves to open to the social fields that shape our experiencing. I don't know the truth of this student of Diane's any more than I did with those in her other case studies, but we can easily map some possible points of reference. I assume She or he's coming home in the evening from work, a major gear shift of identity and of role, of different kinds of relationship. For most of us, our work lives are times of intense activity focused on specified tasks. Work relationships are hierarchical, so maybe she or he's put upon by their boss, who's been leaned on by their boss in turn. It's stressful, but at least the rules of behaviour at work are clearly defined. She or he is used to deferring to superiors, and back home they likely need some validation, some recognition by their partner of the valuable contribution they're making. Under difficult circumstances, perhaps too hoping for the deference or admiration of the children. Or maybe she or he is the boss, used to giving orders, receiving the deference of others, their very own PA there to anticipate every need. She or he arrives home to the chaos and differing priorities of family. Their partner too may have been at work all day or at home juggling the infinite varied tasks of family life, while their children will probably be, according to their ages, their dispositions, and their own social experience. How was your day at school? There'll be a mixture of need, raw energy, stonewalling insecurity, and probably also love. All of them will have different requirements which are actually perhaps better seen as their assumptions and expectations about family life. Where do these come from for any of us? Our own childhood home figures large, the images we could pick up from films and TV, conversations with friends and co-workers. How should it be? How is it supposed to feel? A sanctuary from the outside world? That my family are the meaning of life for me? That they expect me to work all day and then come home to work another shift without a thank you? We can't think about any of this without asking questions. So we need to ask about the major distinction our society makes between public, the world of work and social life, and private, my family, my home. This division isn't in any way natural, but has evolved to suit the specific and shifting needs of our capitalist economy and frames how we think about work-life balance, employment conditions, domestic arrangements, and how we establish and maintain both traditional and non-traditional gender roles. Our current understanding of public and private treats them as seemingly hermetically sealed spheres, each making their own demands and often being in competition. This split isn't something of our own devising, but the result of the choices that have been made for us about how our society is organised, choices over which we have little significant choice of our own. So how do we see Diane's student? As failing to engage with their life as it is and failing because of their requirement? Or can we see their experiencing emerging out of a whole field of different relationships that place stresses and demands on them that are sometimes explicit and sometimes tacit but understood? Why does she or he open the fridge to get a beer? Because coming home, experiencing this sudden shift of their way of being between one set of relationships and another is painful. It hurts in its difference and in its demands and in the uncertainty of what will be asked of them by their partner and the children. I think Diane is exactly right in her question. Would there be another way to be there and honour the tenseness rather than ignoring it? Which is to ask them to take their life whole, to see that both their desire to turn away and the discomfort that provokes it are still part of life as it is, part of this complex of relationships. How does this actually feel, and what are the feelings beneath which she or he and we are working so hard not to feel by blunting our experiencing with beer or wine or any other evasion? To remind ourselves of another of Diane's excellent practice questions: what's the worst that could happen? If I allow myself this feeling and meet my family without the support of beer or wine, what's the worst that could happen? my guess is we're not far from exactly the kind of feelings we explored in relationship to the sixth precept, those connected with our identity, our relation to gender, and our experience of shame. How do we begin to work with all of this? By allowing ourselves to experience our own fears and fantasies, our own shame. But equally importantly, by exploring our relationships with those others with whom we feel the need to hide from our own wholeness. And in Diane's student's case, and perhaps the same for the rest of us, their family. Let's ask about the feelings of both partners and the children. All of this is life as it is, and it is as relationship that it needs to be worked through. The sixth precept is clear what the process needs to be. Can each come to meet the others with openness and possibility? Our practice is towards making this happen. Individually and collectively. What goes for Diane's student goes for all of us, and for me too. To see all my thoughts, feelings and actions in response to the complex forces acting in different areas of my life as, well, to see all this as in some way only being my business and so uniquely my responsibility is to come perilously close to falling into exactly that pit of shame that both produces and is produced by the illusion of our isolation as an individual separate from all others. This is an illusion more destructive and perverse in that it's always socially constructed. As we've explored, I can only be my shamed and separated self in relation to a world of others. It's also to offer me a fantasy of control I can never make real. The whole point about our practice with life as it is to recognise not simply the limits to my ability to control the relationships, both internal and external, that make up my life, but to problematise the notion of control itself. And we don't need to compound our existing delusions here. Instead, we need to learn to take ourselves whole. Taking myself whole is to expand my limited notion of self, to include all aspects of myself, myselves, and my relationships as they show up as my experiencing. I have to include, to make space for, to allow the painful truths of the world to be recognised as and in myself, myselves. Choco's basic image of practice as fostering our growth in becoming a bigger container, ABC, in our ability to just be with what is painful to us, is central here. For all of us, this is hard, and for most of us, this will sometimes be impossible. But even to recognise this impossibility is something. What is painful to us is not easily managed for the very reason that it isolates us within ourselves and automates and makes reflexive our reactions to what are always in reality complex and nuanced situations. We're now in a better position to understand why this precept isn't per se about drinking alcohol or using any particular substance. This precept applies to all and to every means we use to evade the painful truths of life in myself and in the world, thereby obscuring the wisdom and intelligence present in life as it is in any moment. Diane. Originally, this precept focused on the use of alcohol, but later it was expanded to include the use of other substances like marijuana, tranquilizers, hallucinogens, and so forth. Today we can think of more subtle ways we turn from being present by using and abusing not only mind-altering drugs, but also caffeine, cigarettes, food, and activities like exercise, TV watching, internet surfing, work, sensory highs, or anything that can turn us from the immediate experience of our minds and bodies. True. In exploring this precept, we focus not so much on what particular drugs or activities are acceptable to use, but rather what our intention is and how we can use any substance or engage in any activity that drives us further into our habitual ways of meeting the events and circumstances of everyday life. My point is that alcohol, drugs, TV, whatever, are not escapes in and of themselves. What makes them escapes is how we use them. Okay, I want to both agree and disagree here. Diane's fundamental point is absolutely correct. It's how we use things, but her approach, as with so much of Western Zen, seems very asocial. It's always all about me, never about us. This is more strange given that Zen teachers so often speak of us all being one body, an idea that's very relevant to how we think about and practice with the precepts, though it's easy to get mystical with it. Thich Nhat Hanh talked of the collective body as one aspect of our interdependence and interbeing, and applying this insight practically is a good way to counter both asocial and mystical tendencies. We need to examine how the collective body shows up as us in our everyday lives and in the broader patterns of our society. So, here's the Plum Village formulation of this precept. Aware that true happiness is rooted in peace, solidity, freedom and compassion, we are determined not to accumulate wealth while millions are hungry and dying, nor to take as the aim of our life fame, power, wealth or sensual pleasure, which can bring much suffering and despair. We will practice looking deeply into how we nourish our body and mind with edible foods, sense impressions, volition and consciousness. We are committed not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs or any other products which bring toxins into our own and the collective body and consciousness, such as certain websites, electronic games, music, TV programs, films, magazines, books and conversations. We will consume in a way that preserves compassion, well-being and joy in our bodies and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of our families, our society, and the earth. An insightful list, but it might seem to be saying the exact opposite of Diane. So should we really be thinking in terms of toxins here? From the point of view of me and my choices, it could be argued that it's not the guns that kill people, it's people that use guns to kill people. Or at least that's what the National Rifle Association always says. Actually, it's the combination of the two which is dangerous, and rather than locking up or executing all of the potential killers, which means all of us, and that's me and you too, sanity suggests it might be more humane and effective to tackle the availability of the guns. What both liberal and conservative arguments always seem to ignore is that there is a vast industry creating not only the products themselves, but the social conditions under which there is a demand for their products. Nobody made you go out and buy a gun and kill with it. Well, true, but many people contributed to the conditions where this seemed like the right or only choice possible. Blaming the individual weapon for the harm it causes is stupid. But to claim the individual who used it was entirely free in their choices, well, that's equally so. Which is why we fall back so often on the ultimate non-explanation of calling things evil as an alternative to any real understanding or acceptance of our collective responsibility for the collective body. Thus it is with our use of substances and all of life's other evasions. The nature of toxins also provides us with a further insight. The all-important point with any toxin is dosage. Substances vital to the human body at one level can become toxic or fatal at a higher level, and many substances we think of as poisonous are well tolerated at low levels. Almost any substance or activity is potentially toxic, but some are clearly much more so than others. Guns, for instance. So that rethinking Diane's insight at the social, the collective level allows us to frame it more usefully. So, for example, it's important to talk of the psychological factors that, for instance, lead to our obsessive scrolling of social media or news feeds rather than engaging with life as it is. But frankly stupid to do so if we ignore the algorithms governing these feeds. Algorithms whose only purpose is generating clicks to produce the advertising revenue that's the sole reason for the hosting platform's existence. how we as individuals use potentially toxic substances and media is led by a collective usage of them, because it is at this level that the industries responsible for developing and marketing them as products operate, always with profit as their primary purpose. We make our individual choices within a collective frame. How do we draw our individual and collective lines? In social terms, why ban heroin and crack cocaine and not ban or more severely restrict the use of alcohol, which in terms of its collective harming is our society's most dangerous drug by far? How do we find the line between substances and activities I can reasonably make choices about and those which should be matters of public health, public safety? What do we require protecting from, and where do we feel that misuse by others, well, that's nothing to do with us, shouldn't be allowed to interfere with our own fun? We stress the non-judgmental attitude, but this doesn't mean shutting our eyes to what's going on, to what it is that I'm doing, but also to what's going on around me and within my society and the wider world. What are the toxic effects at each level, and what are the causes? As an individual, to allow myself to find my own way forward in my own time as I develop a greater understanding of what's going on around me within my society. Well, developing that kind of self-honesty may well be my best approach, but what if it is 2 bottles of vodka a day? Or my stealing to get the money for my dealer so I can carry on shooting up? What if it's spending my days on incel websites, or gambling away my family's home without them knowing, or downloading child porn every night? What then? What if it's actually me I'm talking about here with the big stuff? Selling to the addicts. For most of us, most of the time it's not that, but instead any or all of those plethora of activities that clearly are neither good nor bad in themselves. Playing and watching sports, exercise, even the food we eat. In fact, most of us lift our mood or counteract stress by eating. Chocolate, cookies, foods that remind us of childhood or happier times, or just the buzz of sugars and the satiety of fats. The pleasures of looking, smelling, tasting and chewing, of contrasting textures in the mouth. Is this in any way wrong or worrying? And yet we know that in the West obesity is a massive and growing problem. We know that if we comfort eat too much, we may well end up comfort eating because we are so fat, or simply that it becomes our go-to response in any difficult situation. Clearly this too is evading the painful truths of our life, yet ridiculous not to take into account that this finding refuge in overeating is a response to exactly that cycle of shaming we looked at in relation to the 7th precept. I experience myself as individualized and in permanent competition with others, so creating a sense of personal inadequacy, and with it the fantasy of personal fulfillment through buying and consuming. What I get is the momentary forgetfulness of experiencing the real pleasures of the mouth, smell, taste, texture. The global food industry has developed in the way it has to supply this need, a need that the global economic system itself has created. Extended supply lines expropriate from local populations to provide cheap raw materials processed by multinational corporations into attractively packaged commodities, the actual properties of which are engineered to be maximally addictive, while intense corporate lobbying pushes back against whatever minimal public health measures individual governments may try to put in place, all reliant on the insecurity induced in us through our individualization as free workers and consumers. Ditto, of course, the huge alcohol industry and its intensive marketing, to which we shall return. Perhaps the most severe and widespread social and chemical addiction of recent times has actually been nicotine, traditionally in the form of tobacco, but now increasingly as vaping. What goes for food goes for tobacco also. There's the action of holding between the fingers, the ritual, often social, of lighting the cigarette and then inhaling the feel of the filter between the lips, the warmth of smoke, it's trailing off into the air. The fall of ash, the hand positions are smoking mudras. All this quite apart from the actual hit of the nicotine. Why was it so cool to smoke? Ask Hollywood. Long gone are the days when advertising depicted every smoker as a handsome cowboy with the gold braid of an airline pilot, but the principles haven't changed. In what ways do these stories become our own? What do they reveal about ourselves and about our world, and what do they hide? This product will make me look good and feel good and give relief from the truths that worry me, and in some small way I'll become a different me, if only for a moment or two. There's no simple escape from these stories, of course. This is the culture, the society which I inhale with every breath. Who is it who reaches for the cigarette? Well, if I'm happily a smoker, this might seem an easy one to answer. Yeah, okay, but when it's my fifth go at quitting and all my previous attempts have collapsed after a week or a month, then just who reaches for the cigarette? The nicotine? My body? My weakness? My badness? My will? My intention? How do I judge? And what's really going on? Oh, likewise when I'm pouring a beer or opening the biscuit tin or the cookie jar. Who? Any of these will show me, if I pause to notice, that I'm never simply one thing, a whole, undivided, unitary person. Different parts of me want different things, often in the same moment. Our relationships with our habits often show us this very clearly and intimately. Habit is, of course, itself a long-standing slang for addiction, and I need to feed my habit. How many of our habits are connected with evasion, momentary or sustained? But of course our habits are not ours, in the sense of being biologically programmed or engraved on our souls. They exist only in context of our being this person in this family doing that job, surrounded by others consuming in the way they do, immersed in a sea of advertising for the products and services, cookies, gambling websites, lost leader, alcohol, porn, that can be profitably marketed to us and provided for us. And now, as internet users, we're all under permanent training by the algorithms that use us to scroll on and click through to generate the all-important advertising revenue. But this is just the most sophisticated and perhaps also the clearest, most explicit iteration of the process basic to consumer capitalism. Use the alternation of fantasy and shaming to induce a need one can profitably fill. Whatever the particular form or the individual circumstances underlying it all is this turning away from my life, but often without really being aware that that's what I'm doing. Despite what I consciously believe or want, and despite all the teachings about mindfulness and awareness, I find myself being led into ignorance, into dissociation. There's a turning away from what hurts or from what this part of me assumes is going to hurt. In this turning away from aspects of my experiencing, I displace and limit the fullness of my awareness and attention by dissociating from what I experience as painful. I may wish instead to soothe myself, to numb out or excite. Or I may wish simply for myself to vanish, be it for an hour or forever. In reality, all of these solutions Life's harder experiences separate us from both the wholeness of ourselves and of our relationships with others. A wholeness which, of course, always includes our pain, our resistance, our dis-ease. Whatever self-states I enter, I become, are inevitably configured in relation to what I've dissociated from as not me. This not me may function like the blind spot on my retina, something of which I'm completely unaware in what appears to me as a full, consistent and coherent vision of the world. To return to Dan Rossetto, we obscure the wisdom and intelligence present in life as it is in any moment, any event and in any place. Many of our turnings away are harmless, or at least not actively damaging to ourselves or others. We're often simply too much for ourselves, both in ourselves and in our relationships with others. There is no simple line dividing harmless and harmful evasions, hence the need for thorough and sustained investigation in the direction of becoming more open and more self-honest. The difficulty is that it's of the nature of the very process of dissociation that it excludes aspects of our own experiencing, and so leads us in the direction of self-states that seem to make sense of and appear to justify the unjustifiable. We become blind to the harming that we suffer and the harming that we do. I'm not an addict. I'm just... As we've already noted, the original subject of this precept is the use of alcohol, in its effect of causing heedlessness, leading us to causing harm by actions or speech. I found much insight in listening to the responses of new students and the world at large to thinking about their use of alcohol. For many, I think even for most people, suggesting that our drinking might be problematic both for ourselves as an individual and part of a much wider social problem brings out our resistance. Always a red flag for practice. Brings out our resistance in a way that points to our feeling shamed by the suggestion itself. The thought that we might want to think about, reduce or eliminate our drinking, whether as part of our Buddhist practice or not, often evokes reactions that swing between a suppressed panic and incredulity or even outright hostility. The traditional interpretation of this precept definitely is that we stop using alcohol altogether. Our ordinary mind approach doesn't ask us to do that, but instead to get more interested in why even the idea of stopping drinking seems difficult for us. And so to become curious about our resistance and what that might tell us about the ways in which we actually do use alcohol. We see at once that lying, stealing, killing and so on are wrong. And even though we inevitably find it hard to entirely match our behaviour to them, we don't challenge these standards themselves. We're not immediately looking for get-outs. Do I have to give up alcohol entirely to be a Buddhist? How much is okay? Is it okay to have a beer with a meal? Is it okay as long as I don't get really drunk? People never ask, do I have to stop stealing? How much am I allowed to steal a day if I'm a Buddhist? How many lies can I tell and how big? Can I kill someone if everyone agrees they're a bad person, or if I feel like I have to, or if I only do it on Tuesdays? Is that okay? NB, of course, alcohol might really not be your thing, and if, take it or leave it, really is how you feel, and this is the moment to shift your attention to whatever does bring up feelings of irritation or anger when you think of giving it up, stopping, doing without. What pleasures or comforts do I treat as requirements? Which do I feel I have some kind of right to? These might even include things that make us feel virtuous, like my exercise regime, my regular zazen. So, this precept is as much about awareness of the feelings of discomfort, of dis-ease, dukkha, that make us willing to argue that black is white if it means we don't have to challenge our behaviour, It's as much about that as it is about what we actually do. Anyone who does give up drinking will be familiar with the reactions this provokes. People will probably assume you're an alcoholic or on serious medication. If you do try to explain about Buddhism, then they'll think you've joined some kind of a cult, intent on forcing you to give up. But why can't you drink? So I need to put my liking a drink, or feeling I need a drink, in context. Why did Diane's student feel that they needed a drink, or that one would help? Alcohol is a socially sanctioned mood-adjusting drug produced and promoted by a massive industry that spends billions on advertising and marketing. We've learnt to associate using alcohol with good times, with sharing with our friends and family, with being ourselves and letting our hair down. This industrial product is marketed as an essential part of our personal expression, of our exercising our ability to discriminate and judge in our choosing of one brand over another, and even a subversive and transgressive blow against a straight-laced and moralising society. It promises freedom. Freedom from our cares and our responsibilities. Freedom just to be our true selves, however we imagine them. Whereas the Friday night drunk, the solo drinker, the driver who lost control, the night that ended in a fight, or in sex they didn't really want or weren't even able to consent to, let alone the true alcoholic. These are all someone else and other who, whether we pity or damn them, they can't cope, they can't take their drink. Perhaps they have an addictive personality related to personal trauma or their poor genes. Either way, they are nothing to do with us, and their existence is no reason to spoil our fun. There's much ambivalence around public health campaigns to encourage us to reduce or stop drinking. Drinking, the euphemism itself, tells us so much. One journalist describes joining an anonymous WhatsApp group where would-be non-drinkers could share the guilty secret of their desire to stop and the shaming they faced by doing so. If you stop or simply attempt to reduce your drinking, you violated our societal norm around alcohol, and you will be shamed as a result. We demand the assent of others to our worldview, best understood not so much as a set of explicit ideas, but as patterns of dissociation. For others to fail to dissociate along similar pathways challenges the coherence of our own self-states, resulting as they do from exactly those patterns of dissociation. Those of a certain age will remember the first government campaigns linking the newly recognised AIDS virus, HIV, to drug use. They featured a stereotypically derelict junkie, pale and sunken-eyed, huddled in the corner of a bare room saying, I'm not an addict, I've just got a touch of flu today. I think the copywriter nailed the key delusion of addiction, and one that fits perfectly our society's use of alcohol. Not of alcoholics, but of the culture of which we are all a part. Alcohol, due largely to the scale of its use, is the world's most dangerous drug. It's a disinhibitor, allowing violence of all kinds and active expression that it would otherwise lack. The links between alcohol use and domestic violence of all kinds are particularly well established, as are alcohol's effects on our collective violence. Many of the health consequences of both its acute and its long-term use are well known, from depression to liver failure, but others, they're only becoming apparent. My seemingly unique and personal wish to avoid the more potentially painful moments of my own life is part and parcel of all this, a world of human beings engaged in billions of moment-by-moment turnings away. We're not separate from any of this. To reprise our major theme, it's not so much about right and wrong, about do or don't, as about the causes of our turning away and the consequences of our doing so. Our delusive self-states will tend to blind us to both. The war on drugs. Demonizing substances can be as harmful as actively promoting them. The US-sponsored war on drugs has been in full swing internationally for more than a century, and in its own stated terms has been a catastrophic and chronic failure. It has, however, proved a suitable vehicle for political manipulation and to pursue racist agendas, undermining democracy not only in the US itself, but massively so across South America and to a lesser degree in Asia too. It's been used as an argument for increasing social control, particularly of minority populations, and the arming of police forces with military-grade weapons. Illegality makes quality control and reliable information impossible, and combined with the near-total lack of treatment centres and possibilities for effective management, leads to far higher levels of longer and more dangerous addiction. So that alongside the resulting social and health consequences of addiction itself, the continuing illegal trade in drugs produces horrendous levels of violence and exploitation. There are nevertheless a direct consequence of that criminalisation itself. The great powers have a long and dismal history of their involvement with addictive drugs, the war on drugs being merely the latest chapter of their war with drugs. For example, the 19th century British invasions of China, the Opium Wars, succeeded in forcing China to allow the importation and sale of British opium grown in India, a trade that created millions of Chinese addicts and destabilised Chinese society sufficiently not only to break the long-standing Chinese hegemony across Asia and the Pacific, but to make China effectively ungovernable, a situation that ended only with the communist victory following the Second World War. The resulting racial stereotype of all Chinese men as being drug-crazed opium addicts who posed an existential danger to civilized society, and specifically to white women, was then used by the United States as the rationale for making a wide range of recreational and medical drugs illegal throughout the world, inventing a racial panic as a political control on the rapidly growing population of Chinese Americans. This same strategy of criminalising specific drugs, but in this case those favoured by black communities, was an important component of the racism of the Jim Crow era, as one part of the response by white elites following on from post-Civil War Reconstruction. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow showed conclusively that the revival and intensification of the war on drugs from the 1980s onwards was organised, promoted and funded with the covert and frankly often not so covert intention of undermining the advances won by the civil rights movement. The creation and disciplining of a huge black underclass of lawbreakers, fabricating the symbolic equation of blackness with criminality, meaning that the majority of black Americans could more easily be denied the very political, economic and social equality they were now legally guaranteed. Process continuing today. Seems incontrovertible that the war on drugs has created far more harm than it's ever prevented, and that this has been so from its beginning. But as a strategy of mastery of racial and class control, the war on drugs has been and remains effective, and our images of the dangerous other have been shaped by this. In terms of our ordinary mind way of looking at the precepts, it's clear that in defining a section of our society as dangerously and differently other, our governments have created a collective delusion far more dangerous from the world than any clouding of my individual consciousness. This plays to racial stereotyping of the worst sort. Non-whites are irrational and devious, and we, the whites, need to resist at all costs being polluted by them. This is the argument for slavery, colonialism, and exploitation of every kind, even for genocide. By separating off our own collective badness in the figure of the other, we obscure the real issues of our society. This is a misdirection of our collective attention, while we're all to some degree complicit in this. For some it has been and remains their cynical and direct intention to deflect our attention, to misdirect us in the perception and understanding of our world. We don't even have to have the intention to misdirect, though, or even consciously to believe these ideas in order to deepen our delusion. We are in the grip of dangerous ideology, not when we actively debate or discuss, but when we take it for granted that a particular state of affairs is natural or just the way things have always been. So, work hard and you will succeed. Life is dog eat dog. Men are men and women are women, period, are straightforwardly ideological views. But what is most important is how these show up as the limits we place on our own and each other's actions, in the laws we frame and how we police them, and in the institutions and communities we build, as much as in our daily encounters. To study our ideologies is simply to study the more internally coherent of our collective delusions, our unreflective misrecognition of our relationships with others and with the things of the world. Using Buddhism. And what when it's the stories themselves that become the habit, the addiction? I might have got the idea that my real problem is the distractions offered by my sense pleasures in the world of karma. But the world of ideas can be equally and in some ways more involving. Any and all firmly held ideas that demand our unswerving belief have this potential. Political, religious, and of course Buddhist ideas can affect us very powerfully and over long periods of time. Political or ethical views that offer us any degree of certainty about how the world is, or how it should be, can in fact narrow and restrict our view of life, while at the same time creating a passionate conviction that we are correct and that only fools or devils could disagree with us. Displaced onto a great leader or an ideal, our desire for belonging and certainty ceases to seem selfish, and we may even offer ourselves up for metaphorical or even literal martyrdom for the cause. Our precept practice itself and the sense of purpose and identity created through it can become a turning away from my life rather than towards it. If I'm convinced that this is the right path and everybody else is wrong, that I'm clearly caught up in the world of views. I've already referred to the pervasive idea found in many Buddhist schools that what I'm looking for is the right state of mind, whether that be pure consciousness, calm or equanimity, and even mindfulness and awareness can come to be understood in this way. Our quest for control and safety is not unreasonable, but searching to find the right mental state, and one that has the sanction of those I believe my spiritual superiors, is delusion through and through. There is a particular rigidity and inflexibility that may come with the sustained intensity of the effort of striving for spiritual mastery, a striving which may at any point collapse under its own weight, leaving us feeling failure and self-recrimination, a self-judgment from which we will be only too happy to turn away, to continue our search for the next demagogue or spiritual leader, and so further compound our real experience of suffering. Self-states of delusion. I've talked about the assumptions and preconceptions that shape our seeing and linked this to the Buddhist concept of the samskaras, the mental formations, and their effective content. Philip Bromberg's idea of our continually shifting between relatively autonomous self-states returns us directly to our immediate experiencing and to its wholeness. Bromberg talks of our sense of self as the ability to construct the idea of a continuous and unified self, me, out of the reality of discontinuous and constantly shifting self-states, which we move between in relation to the needs of the moment. In this sense, all self-states are versions of delusion, within the delusion of a fully coherent self. There is no simple way I can ever stand back from these to get a true, objective view, and in fact this idea makes no sense. Each self-state feels like me, and each is experienced as whole, as being consistent with itself, despite each being the product of dissociation. But some self-states are more inclusive than others. Some can come to include what has previously been experienced as not me, as bad, as dangerous, completely other. We need to understand delusion neither as failure or a kind of madness, nor as a departure from imagined initial or final clarity. Only then can we claim it and own it as what we all are, embodied, mortal, vulnerable beings experiencing ourselves as the selves we've fabricated out of this moment-by-moment experiencing. We turn towards and we turn away. We see the world in the ways we do and we tell stories about it. It is in the nature of our delusion for it to be invisible to us. The world really looks that way, it feels that way, it makes sense that way. So whether it's the idea that the world is ruled by space lizards or that my heroin use harms no one, I really do experience the world this way. I can never be free of delusion any more than I can be free of being this self-state in this moment. As Barry Magid never tires of saying, there is no delusion so deep as that delusion that I can be free of all delusion. But not all delusions are equal. Philip Bromberg argues that the function of psychoanalysis is to help us stand in the spaces between self-states, to experience their shifting nature and the unnoticed inconsistencies and contradictions within and between them. By so doing, we allow ourselves to, we feel safe to, experience ourselves more inclusively as more whole, and so less subject to the specific dissociations that have formed the coping strategies that serve us so poorly. Our approach through Zen practice is in many ways analogous to this, that by paying attention to the shifting moment-by-moment play of experience which we each are, we may come to see ourselves as less separate, both within ourselves and with each other. We may come to experience more fully our wholeness with the world and within ourselves. And this inevitably involves turning outward to the world of which I'm a part, and to the causes of my turning away and the consequences of my actions. None of my engagement is in this sense neutral or without consequence. Our practice is exploration, not to determine in advance, not to tell us how we must or should think or behave. But this absolutely does not mean that it doesn't matter what choices we make or that it's all relative. If a popular working definition of madness is to keep repeating the same actions and expecting a different result, then we're all clearly mad. But our investigations can lead us to becoming less so. While we can never stand back to get a view from nowhere, our changing patterns of dissociation clearly allow us to see our world as less or more whole, and to act in ways that are more and less harming, both to ourselves and to others, whether in our intimate relationships or the collective body of which Thich Nhat Hanh speaks. Turning towards non-separation. Here's a strategy for practicing with this precept in our day-to-day lives, whether on or off the cushion, None of this is one shot. It's all about coming back and back and back again. It involves working in reverse along the sequence from effect to cause. Recognize the kinds of things I do to displace, evade, or avoid my experiencing of life as it is, whether that's scrolling, reaching for a drink or a cigarette, turning on the TV. Feel the impulse to turn towards these as it arises in the moment. Feel into how it feels physically and emotionally. Anticipation, distraction, guilt, relief. Where in my body do I experience this? What forms does it take? Tension, changing my breathing, heart rate, feeling in my gut, so on. Return to my initial experiencing of the resistance that produces the impulse to turn towards this particular kind of displacement. In my moment-by-moment experiencing of my life as it is, what are the feelings of dukkha, of physical or emotional disease, discomfort, tension or anger that prompt me to turn away? Where in my body am I experiencing this? What are the images, the thoughts, the feelings that arise? Connect this experience of dukkha back to its immediate cause. What's happening around me? What am I thinking as I begin to experience this resistance? Allow the question. Without reaching for easy answers, ask. Just why does being in this situation or thinking these thoughts make me feel this way? If I find a requirement or an assumption, a view or a belief about myself or about the world, how does this fit into the broader pattern of my life? Expand the circle of connections. What role do these specific requirements, assumptions, views and beliefs play in the organisation of our world? Do they help us become more open to the possibility of meeting ourselves and others, or make us act as more separate? Lastly, review the activities I do use as displacements, and for each one, what are their actual effects on me, both long and short term? What place in the world do they have? What are their economic, their political consequences, both for humans and for other sentient beings? We talk, and rightly so, of being non-judgmental in our awareness. Should and should not a death to self-honesty. I feel the way I feel. I want what I want, and I feel and want differently from day to day, moment to moment. In my exploration of what appears as me, I feel and I follow my feelings as they unfold, the thoughts arising and fading that accompany them. My investigation itself is not a neutral or distanced activity, and if I sustain my practice, it can and will change how I feel, how I think, and so also how I consequently act. It's not that right and wrong, or as modern Buddhism likes to say, wholesome and unwholesome actions. It's not that they don't figure, but that we can't assume them in advance or derive them a priori. Being what looks like right may prove very wrong in this particular context, and the attempt to distinguish one from the other may itself lead directly to harming, born of deepening of our delusion, of our moralizing separation to good and bad into us and them. Righteousness is rarely appropriate, and our attempts to imagine we can get on the right side of any issue are always problematic. We've touched on many ways of evading the painful truths of life, and one of these painful truths is that our need to know to be right, and so to be safe from shame and harm, can itself be a cause of suffering and harming. And yet, both as individuals and as a society, we need to act, and hence to judge and realise that our inaction is itself always also an action and a judgment. No escape, We are part of this world, down and dirty with it. We turn away and we turn away. There is much to turn away from, far more than any of us can bear. We can at least bear witness to this turning and investigate it as best we may, as for each of us it shows up as and in me. I cannot step outside my culture or myself. I'm always and forever a part of it. Back to Vimalakirti's I am sick because the world is sick. Hence this investigation of ourselves and the world needs to be gently and kindly and generously done. There is far more to turn away from than any of us can bear. If we persist in our investigations, if we do come back and back and back, we may begin to gain insights about ourselves as we are in the present and as we have been in the past. These insights may, hopefully, help us to see and to experience ourselves as not separate from our embodiment, as social beings. We may come to see the dependence of our turnings away and turnings towards and our collective delusion and dissociation manifesting in our collective requirements, assumptions and ideas. The precept itself won't tell you the purpose or the consequences of your or my opening the fridge, scrolling on the sofa, turning on the TV. Our practice will do this, if we allow it to develop and to deepen. My investigation of my own patterns of reaction and response will definitely bring about changes, though exactly what these will be I'll have to find out as I go. My behaviours shift and adjust, my thinking and experiencing acknowledge the full complexity of the given situation in which I or we or the world find ourselves. This is to return to where we began with this precept, in the moment-by-moment challenging of our fundamental delusion that all existence is that of permanent and separate things, and so instead to see the necessity of the identity of non-separation and emptiness in our own and all existence. In each moment do we turn towards non-separation. This is to turn towards connection and relationship, towards openness and possibility, towards meeting and recognising both self and other. In our turning away, there is also always a different kind of turning towards separation from both self and other, and the distraction of the intensity of momentary experience in our clinging to a fantasized state of mind, in cleaving to the security of an idea of truth or righteousness, or simply the non-feeling of numbing out what is just too painful to bear. Turning towards the separation that in seeming to offer us control and safety instead divides us one from the other and from ourselves also. Sometimes reflection will make this blindingly clear to us. Sometimes the pattern of our delusion will still make us swear that black is white, or even see day as night. It can be hard to recognise in the moment and impossible to divine the consequences moving out into the universe of any one action. My complicities, my cowardices and my heroism, or rather recognising it's not really about me at all, but the way we find ourselves thrown into a world which is not of our making or choosing, and yet is still our world and our only world, the world we share, the world we love. There's a text PDF of this talk on the Ordinary Mind UK website, on the writings page, along with the other commentaries. Thank you for listening.